kidding, it's cold. Sup everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's been a while, my bad. I've been flying up and down the country, collecting parts, dropping parts off, putting engines in, making tweaks. But for the most part, I'm back. Hopefully with a bit more regularity. So today I'm going to be answering a question that everyone's been asking. Where the fuck is Cygnus? In case you didn't know, Cygnus is my RX8. My own personal RX8, which I've used and abused for about 6 years now, or something along those lines. And he's gone through so many different revisions in terms of ports and parts thrown onto him, and basically see what you could extract out of the Renesis in its naturally aspirated form. And I've since moved on to boost. The easiest way to do it was by turbocharging, in my opinion. So we went ahead with that. I've been talking about boosting in for years, and round about this time last year, he underwent that process and he's been on the road pretty much on and off since. We'll talk more about that in this video. So for those who've had the pleasure of owning an RX8, I'm sure you'll agree with me. It's an excellent car in its own right, suits British roads and twisties and whatnot. It suits it to a T. The car's perfectly balanced, the amount of power from it is pretty good until you come across a modern hatchback. It's really not unusual to come across a modern hatchback or a modern car in general that has somewhere around 300 horsepower or more from a downpipe and an email. And when we start comparing the car to them, we quite quickly get bored. We crave more. That's just the way it is. Not putting the car down at all. The RX8 has always been quite cheap compared to everything else, so those that buy RX8s tend not to want to spend more than the car's worth. Which, in all fairness, you could probably do that just in maintenance alone. Now in this day and age, in 2023, there's a lot of aftermarket solutions for a bit more power on the Renesis, and I believe there's even a couple of supercharger kits out there. Whatever fits, whatever floats your boat in terms of forced induction. There is something out there. Whilst the majority of them are great kits, let's be honest, no one's going to be spending that much money on an RX8 just to give it an extra bump in power. Now for some reason, the number 300 seems to appeal to quite a lot of people. It doesn't take too much away from how the car drives, it just gives you that power, that little bit of torque that you've just been craving. But the problem's always been price point. No one wants to buy a £2,000 to £3,000 car and then spend £10,000 on it just for the sake of getting an extra 100 horsepower. So with this in mind, I ended up taking it into my own hands. I've been talking for years about an entry level or low cost turbocharger kit for an RX8. Now in essence, it could be as expensive as you want it to be or as cheap as you want it to be. Naturally, going cheap usually ends up in problems, which is what I'm experiencing currently. But not problems that can't be addressed. So let's talk about my journey into forced induction on the Renesis. So my journey into boosting the Renesis actually started in this workshop. I joined forces with Shane from STG Performance to basically create a turbo kit for the RX8. Shortly after the turbo conversion was done, I got in contact with the guys at Motorsport and Performance, or Rotary Revs as we once knew it, and we got it on the dyno. On the day it made 246 wheel at 4 psi, which I deemed quite a good result considering the turbo was hardly breathing at that point. We're nowhere near an efficiency island. So, it got absolutely abused that cold winter's night, and I will say the most noticeable change in all of that was that torque down low that it never had. Granted, we're only on baby boost at this point, but it was instantly noticeable and it made driving a whole lot easier. I actually found myself beating on it a bit less. just because the whole rev range was pretty much usable. But that was short-lived because the following day the engine decided to throw a bearing. So far there's only been 2 major failures, and the first one was probably not even 24 hours after leaving the dyno. I got a bit too giddy, dropped the clutch a few too many times, and as a result cracked a bearing journal in a rotor. And to be honest, that might have been from long-term abuse, as it's the same engine that I've had for the last 2 or 3 years. So I gave it a month, enjoyed the Christmas period, and then once I got back into it in the new year, I sent my rotating assembly away for balancing. All new bearings, pretty much stacked the engine as it was straight after the dyno. Roll into spring, we've done a few drive outs. I started to put some mileage on the build and I enjoyed every single step of it. And over time I ended up making some changes in ECU myself, and incrementally I started to bring up the boost up to about 9 psi by the spring, and it seemed to be quite happy at that. No idea on what power it made at this point, simply because it never went back on the dyno, but it was pulling pretty hard, and it was far easier to keep up with things like S3s and, you know, all your typical German hatchbacks. As we crept into summer, I started getting greedy and started to turn up the boost even more, to about 12 psi. And it was quite quickly after that I realised there was an issue with the engine. It just seemed to be breaking up at about 7,000 RPM. The ignition system was good, everything seemed to be okay, but there was a slight dip in the compression on one of the rotors, so I knew something had gone down. So this was about July time, and the following month I tried to start it on the drive and it wasn't playing ball. So I live on a slope, literally let it roll down the road at some speed, put it into gear, and I forced it away. There was a whole load of smoke coming out, and at that point I realised it had water seal failure, which explained the breakup. So back to the shop it went, I stripped it down and physically confirmed that it had water seal failure. But I'd also noticed another issue. The housings, granted they'd been chattering away simply because aftermarket seals, but there seemed to be a lot of shrinkage around one of the housings, particularly around the combustion area. So at that point I kind of thought, right, 9 psi or just slightly under is the safer limit for the Renesis, I'd say. And beyond that, you're going to have to do some serious reinforcements. And by serious, I mean, after that point, you've got to make some changes. So, you know, things like a stud kit to keep the engine together under boost and whatnot, especially with the higher compression rotors. Your water methanol injection, or in my case, water injection, just to keep those combustion temperatures down as well. And all in all, that should get you to the next step. Which is where I'm currently at. I'm waiting on some studs, amongst a couple other things before I stick my engine back together. Hopefully I'll be able to do that before Christmas, do some more mileage, do some more testing, and basically see what we can really push out of the Renesis engine. So here's a brief summary of what we've got. We've got a custom-made manifold made by STG Performance, with an external wastegate at the back. Probably the only convenient location for it all, and it allows for very snug fitment of the turbo against the engine. And the turbo in question is a Pulsar GTX 3076R with a just over a 1AR T3 flanged hot side. It's big enough to flow enough exhaust gases at the top of the rev range. The rev limiter was brought down to about 8,800 just to give the engine the best chance at higher loads. Now, as for port configuration, we've got a full bridge, quite aggressive versus what I usually do for customers, but yeah, again, pushing boundaries. And just down here, we've got what I call the race extension. This is basically a widened exhaust port to allow for more overlap. Makes a hell of a brap, but as far as how it handles boost, it's a question mark. I've yet to compare it against a stock engine or just a full bridge engine. There's nothing abnormal about what I see upon teardown of this engine, so I'm quite happy with that. And this is a balanced Renesis rotor that I've been running. Biggest change is obviously the Rx8 2mm apex seal slot. We had it machined just to accommodate the bigger seals. So above we've got a standard 2mm Renesis apex seal, and underneath it we've got the bigger REW apex seal. Now the reason why I made the switch to REW seals is because it sits deeper within the rotor. So if I pick that up, obviously it would usually have a corner seal in place, but it sits deeper in the rotor, which means it's less likely to rock about under high load and high stress. Now if I show you with a 2mm Rx8 apex seal, it doesn't sit as deep into the corner seal, so you get a little bit of rocking, and that under pressure, under high RPM, is going to cause it to jump against the housing. Which leads me onto the housing. This is the housing I actually ran, and granted there's some shrinkage that occurred from overheating and whatnot, but there is a very noticeable mark there around that top spark plug hole. That, I'm led to believe, was caused by the apex seal jumping around, and there is a slightly more noticeable one underneath as well. Just there, you can see it you can just about see it when the light catches. So with all this data collected, I can now make the necessary changes for high boost. So we've got a stud kit on the way. The rotors have been machined to accommodate Rx7 apex seals, and I'm getting a bigger intercooler. I knew I was chancing it with a smaller intercooler. It was simply for the purpose of trying to keep costs down, but there's just some things you cannot scrimp on, and that's been proven. With this teardown. So yeah, we're going to be pushing the boundaries. We're going to see what we can do. If we end up popping the engine again, it is what it is. We just make the necessary changes and try again. That's what we're about. Now, a couple of questions I get asked often are, how much power can you expect from the kit, and how much is the kit going to cost? So we'll start with power. Based on what I've seen and the conservative nature of the tune, low boost, which is sort of like the entry-level side of the kit, I expect between 7 to 9 psi. You can see numbers of about 260 to 280 at the wheels. On a conservative tune, you're not trying to break any records kind of thing. This is just a nice, safe tune that you can use on track days, beat it around drift days and things like that. Obviously there's going to be some testing for that as well, but so far it's been pretty good on track days. And in terms of high boost, I want to see 400 at the wheels. That's always been the goal for me, and I suspect with the water injection and a few other modifications to put on, I can see that at about 17 psi. For some reason 17 psi seems to be the number that sticks in my head, so I'm gonna roll with it. If I have to turn it up a bit more, I will. I'm sure the engine's more than capable of it. And if not, we'll just dial it down once we find that physical limit. Price point now. There's going to be some processes that I explore to make production a bit more cost effective, but essentially I'm wanting to aim for about £4,000. I think that's a good number for the development, for what the Rx8s are worth. I should happily see a power figure that people are more than happy with, you know, quite an accessible thing. Beyond that, there's still quite a lot to explore. And it doesn't just stop at my car as well. Once I'm happy with the product, I'm going to be taking on another couple of cars to use as guinea pigs, such as a stock ported 231 and a 192, or potentially an R3, just to see how different setups react. But for the most part, all the abuse is going to be done on mine, and then we'll introduce some other cars a little bit later on. Once I'm happy with the exhaust manifold design, in terms of clearance and fitment, etc., I'd like to go into cast production. And it wouldn't be investment cast or anything of the sort, it'd simply be just your bog standard casting sort of thing. Once again, all in the pursuit of trying to keep the costs low. If you have any questions about the kit or anything about this whole process I've been going through, please just ask in the comments. That pretty much sums everything up to this point. I guess one other thing to say is that Cygnus is going to be experiencing a pretty significant physical change. Cosmetically, Cygnus is going to be getting quite a big refresh for 2024. But prior to that, I'm hoping to build the engine back up, go straight into high boost. We're going to be taking him back to Motorsport Performance to finalise the tune and run high boost and see what numbers he can make. And that wraps up this video. Once again, thank you for watching. Hope it's been enjoyable and informative for you. If you like the content, please give us a like and a subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.